We live in the golden age of science writing, where every difficult subject that was previously inaccessible to us because of its complexity now has an author who can explain to us ideas from quantum mechanics, AI, or genetics in a very intelligible and entertaining language. I've spoken about authors like this in my previous videos. In one of my previous videos, I told you about a Stanford professor, Robert Sapolsky, who explains how we behave through a lens of biology. I've also mentioned the book by Walter Isaacson, which explores the scientific revolution that is happening right now in gene editing technology. In this video, I would like to tell you about the Italian physicist Carlo Rovelli. You might have heard about him. He's the author of a best-selling book called 7 Brief Lessons on Physics, and recently he has released a collection of his essays that were previously published in different Italian newspapers and magazines. This collection of essays has a beautiful title that says, "There are places in the world where rules are less important than kindness." It's a very long title, but a very beautiful one. And this collection of essays consists of 30 or so essays that were published at different times. What makes Carlo Rovelli unique is that he makes the connection between art and science that any other popular science author fails to do. And for this reason, I would like to tell you about 3 different essays that this book includes. The first essay is about Newton and alchemy. The second one is about the great Italian poet Dante and how he predicted the scientific discovery of Einstein 6th century before. And the third essay is not connected with either science or art, it's connected about politics. It's called Why National Identity is Toxic. I'll leave the timestamps to these essays so you can either browse through or watch it all together. In 1936, the British economist John Maynard Keynes bought from auction previously unpublished works by Sir Isaac Newton. He was surprised to discover that those works related to Isaac Newton's study of alchemy. This discovery, of course, raised a lot of questions of how the person such as Isaac Newton, the man who is the archetype of rational thinking and scientific inquiry, could spend decades of his life studying alchemy. This raised, of course, a lot of speculations. There were conspiracy theorists that were saying that Isaac Newton found some secret knowledge that he didn't want to release to the wider public, and many other silly theories such as this. But what Carlo Rovelli points out here, he says that the secret to whole mystery around those papers on alchemy lie in the fact that Newton never published them. Newton studied alchemy and conducted many experiments and tried to prove whether alchemy is right or wrong, and it seems that he didn't find any scientific evidence that alchemy might be right and useful and might open some other doors of perception to us. What Rovelli points out in this beautiful essay is that we should always be careful of what we think is false. Isaac Newton, of course, could have disregarded alchemy, but he would never know if it is actually wrong. This is very applicable to our daily life. We should never take the position of comfort, of consensus, of saying that, well, it is widely accepted that this is right or wrong. What Rovelli points out is that the curious mind, the scientific mind, always questions how does it know what it knows. And what is interesting that the experiments that Newton conducted in his pursuit of finding the truth in alchemy became later the foundations of the science that we call chemistry. This is such a beautiful example of scientific curiosity, of trying to find what is true and what is wrong. And the second essay of Rovelli explores the connection between poetry and science. It talks about Dante and how in his Divine Comedy, when he reaches the heaven and meets Beatrice, his love, he sees the end of the universe, and Dante had to creatively invent what lies beyond the heaven. And the thing that he invented is very closely connected to the three-sphere universe that Einstein discovered in the beginning of the 20th century. What Rovelli points out is what we often forget in the 21st century is that science and art were never separate, they were always together. Even when we look at Leonardo da Vinci, he wasn't a simple painter who created all those masterpieces of art. He was incredibly curious in science, in anatomy, and that influenced his art. In a similar manner, we can look at Bernini or Michelangelo. The art and science were always closely linked together, and this is what Rovelli points out, and he has a beautiful sentence in his essay. He says, "The culture of today that keeps science and poetry so far apart is essentially foolish, to my way of thinking, because it makes us less able to see the complexity and the beauty of the world as revealed by both." Dante himself was very curious about science and how the world is structured, and of course he didn't have all the answers and he had to rely on creativity, and through his creativity he essentially described what science would discover 7 centuries after, and the person who discovered it was Einstein, who himself emphasized many times in his works how important art is for him. He said that the greatest thoughts on science comes to him when he plays violin. This is one small example of many from the essays of Carlo Rovelli of how he connects art and science. And as I said, this is what makes him unique from any other popular science writer. It's this connection between rational and art. And the third essay that I would like to share with you also triggered many thoughts in me when I read it. It's called "The Why National Identity is Toxic." And what I liked about this essay is that Carlo Rovelli doesn't deny that our national identity is a very important part of us. Many of the writers of today say that we should disregard it, that it is unnecessary, that it is toxic by itself. But what Rovelli says is that national identity becomes toxic when we put it as our primary identity. What Rovelli says is that we are all born and influenced where we come from. He himself was born in Italy and was of course influenced by Italian culture and Dante himself. But what he says that many other factors influenced him as much as his national identity. The fact that he is a physicist, his connection with the world literature, his connection of where he lived throughout his life. Our identity consists of many layers, and national identity played a great role when it united people. Rovelli gives an example of his native Italy, which before the 19th century was just small divided kingdoms that were ruled by the empires. But later, when Italian identity was formed and all those kingdoms were united and people were brought together, the national identity played a positive role in this case because it facilitated cooperation between those small kingdoms. The toxic part of national identity comes when it stops us from cooperating with other people, when it reduces us into those small boxes of nationality. And this is what I liked about this essay, is the fact that national identity is integral part of us, but we shouldn't consider it to be our primary identity. I would like to read to you 2 brief and beautiful sentences from this essay. "When the national interest promotes conflict rather than cooperation, when instead of searching for compromise and agreed rules, it is thought preferable to put one's nation above all else, national identity becomes toxic." And the second sentence, "Not that we don't have national identities, we do have them, but each of us is a crossroads of multiple, layered identities. Putting the nation first means betraying all the others." This essay is not only about our national identity, but it is about our identity in general, how multi-layered it is, how much we are shaped about our own unique stories. I hope you enjoyed my brief summary of Carlo Rovelli's brilliant collection of essays that were published just a couple of months ago here in the UK. I have actually made a separate page on my website with all the notes, and I include all the books that Rovelli mentions in these essays, all the beautiful quotes and ideas. You can find it in the description of this episode. You can actually receive them straight to your inbox every month if you subscribe to my newsletter. I'll leave the link to the subscription in below. I hope you enjoyed this very short video essay. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you in the next one.